Hey friends, I hope your week is off to a great start. Today we're going to be trying out Sarah Jampel's recipe for Camouflage Brownies. So this is from the Basically Better Baking series, and it is a level 2 recipe. From a flavor profile perspective, I expect that this recipe is going to be somewhat similar to the Black Bottom Brownies recipe that I tested a few weeks back. If you haven't seen that video, you can click here after this video and go over and check that out. Let me know in the comments whether you think you'd prefer this recipe or that recipe. Both have a rich fudgy brownie with a tangy tart cream cheese component, so I'm really curious to see how this recipe stacks up against that recipe. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get right into this. So I've got all of my supplies here right at the stove because we're going to be messing around with the double boiler repeatedly, so I didn't want to be walking back and forth. Not that my kitchen is large, but this is just slightly more efficient. So I've got my saucepan with the water at just a bare simmer. So I'm going to pop the cream cheese, this is an 8-ounce bar, over that. Now, you'll notice that the water is not touching the bottom of the bowl, and I'm just going to turn the heat down to kind of a medium-low. And we want this cream cheese to melt fully. So I'm just going to stir this around until it's nice and runny. All right, so it has been 3 minutes. My cream cheese is looking nice and loose and runny. It's super easy to stir. I don't see any clumps remaining. So now at this point, I'm going to turn the heat off. I'm going to move my water to the back burner just to keep it hot. All right, so now off the heat here, we're going to add in our granulated sugar. Got some kosher salt, some vanilla extract, and 1 chilled egg. Now we're going to stir this to get everything combined. This mixture is really, really liquidy and loose. All right, so I think that looks nice and homogeneous. So now I'm going to split this roughly in half, and the recipe says it's okay if we eyeball it. Now to the small bowl, I'm going to add in some Dutch processed cocoa, and I've already sifted this. So obviously the plain cream cheese mixture is going to be the white component of the camouflage. This cocoa powder added to the cream cheese is going to be the light brown component. And then the brownie batter itself is going to be the dark brown component. All right, and I think that cocoa powder looks nice and evenly incorporated. There are a few speckles in there, but I am not bothered by those in the least. So we can move on to the next step. Over that same pot of simmering water now, I've got 10 tablespoons of unsalted butter cut into 1 tablespoon pieces. And to that now, we're going to add the rest of the ingredients for the brownie batter. First up, we've got granulated sugar, followed by some kosher salt, and more sifted Dutch processed cocoa. At this point, we're waiting for the butter to melt down, and then we're going to continue heating until the mixture reaches a temperature where we can't leave our finger in it for longer than 3 seconds. BA didn't provide an exact temperature, so when I get to that point, I will temp it and let you all know what that is for me. That way you'll have a closer approximation of where you want to be. The recipe does give the option to include espresso powder. However, I don't have espresso powder, and I didn't really want to buy it for an optional ingredient that requires only 1 teaspoon. It just doesn't feel like something I'll use on a regular basis. All right, so after about 3 minutes over the heat, you can see the butter is really starting to melt here. We're getting the cocoa powder and the sugars hydrated. Got a long way to go there. We're not quite halfway there yet. So the recipe said 7 to 9 minutes is what we're looking for. We're just about at 7, so I'm going to go ahead and test the temperature out. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah. It's hot. Okay, so we have reached the temperature we're looking for. That was, wow, that was uncomfortable. Okay, it's still very grainy. However, I don't think that's an issue because once we add the egg, it'll emulsify a bit more. Let's see what this temperature is. 168 Fahrenheit. All right, so 168 degrees is pretty hot. So we're gonna let this cool down for 5 minutes and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, so our brownie mixture has been cooling down for 5 minutes. So the bowl is still super hot. I'm gonna temp it just to see where we're at. We're at 150 is where this is stopping off. A pretty good temperature drop over that 5-minute period. So now to the batter, we're adding in some more vanilla extract and then 2 eggs, but we're gonna add them 1 at a time. And the recipe notes that the batter is gonna look kind of funky at this point, so don't freak out if you look like your batter is split or it looks curdled or if it looks grainy. All of that should be remedied when the second egg gets added in. So mine is looking really gritty and very thick and just, I guess not really too appetizing. So now egg number 2 is going in. All right, and there we go. So Second egg is fully incorporated. This batter is looking really thick and luxurious. It's super glossy. So this looks great. At this point, we're adding in our AP flour. So it's not a ton of flour in here. So we're going to dump it in all at once. And now we want to stir this in until there's no more streaks of flour remaining. So there are no flour streaks remaining in here. And now we're going to do something that I've never done before with the baking recipe. We are going to over mix this to develop the gluten. So there's not a lot of flour in here. So additional stirring now that the flour is incorporated is going to help build the structure for the brownie. So this is kind of the opposite of everything we've said for every other recipe. So the recipe says 30 strokes. So I'm going to count it here. With the batter evenly incorporated, we're ready to build the brownies in the pan. So we're going to take half of this brownie mixture, and I'm just going to eyeball it and scrape this into the bottom of the pan. I think that looks like about half. And the recipe notes that this batter is going to thicken up while it sits, so get it somewhere warm. For me, that's going to be my preheating oven, my preheated oven. I'm going to set that right on top, put it over the vent in the back, and that way it'll get some extra heat. And now this is the kind of arts and crafts portion. We've got our 2 different colors of batter, and we're just going to spoon blobs kind of haphazardly on the surface of the brownie. I might do a couple passes back and forth with these. Surprised by how loose this mixture is. I thought it would thicken up a little bit as it sat. That hasn't really happened too much though. So as I'm kind of layering these colors in concentric circles, it's kind of pushing it toward the center. So if there are any dark brown bits popping through, they're going to get covered up as this batter continues to spread. It's kind of like a zebra vibe I'm getting. Mine isn't quite as camo as what the BA version showed, but that's all right. Okay, I'm going to put some dollops of the darker brownie batter down. I don't really have any sort of method for this. I'm just trying to evenly distribute this remaining batter without having my blobs all really run on top of each other. All right, cool. So we are going to pop this into the preheated oven. Now, I'm using an 8x8 pan rather than a 9x9 pan like the recipe called for. So I've lowered my oven temperature by 25 degrees Fahrenheit. So instead of 325, I'm baking at 300. And I'm also going to have to bake this for a little bit longer. Really, the visual cue that we're looking for here is for a toothpick inserted into the center to come out with some moist crumbs. I'm just going to start checking this at 25 minutes and see where we are. So we'll be back when these are done. I ended up baking my brownies for 50 minutes at 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is the end result. So the surface of the brownie has a nice presence of all 3 different colors. Looking at the profile view, you can see that the marbling and camouflage goes down through the top half of the brownie. So overall, I am really pleased with the end result here. These feel super heavy. It's definitely a thick brownie since I used an 8-inch pan rather than a 9-inch pan, but they look so fudgy and rich, and I'm just dying to dig in. So I'm going to break this in half. It feels really fudgy. Oh my gosh, there's a little bit of a chewy pull there. It looks super dense, super moist. Let's give it a taste. Wow. Incredibly rich. The brownie is so heavy and fudgy in like a really, really good way. The cream cheese just has that little bit of tang to it. I can't really tell the difference in the cream cheese mixtures between the cocoa cream cheese and the regular cream cheese. So eating experience, this is very similar to the black bottom brownie. I'm getting the cream cheese and I'm getting the brownie. Having the 3 colors doesn't really add anything to the kind of the taste and texture. Appearance-wise, it is something kind of different and unique though, so I do like the aesthetic. It's quite tasty. So overall, I'm happy with the brownie. I like the taste, I like the texture. I don't know whether I would actually make this one again though. The whole eating experience is so similar to the black bottom brownies that I made before, and that recipe was a lot more straightforward than this one. It only used the 2 colors, but the 3rd color here really doesn't add any value from a taste or texture perspective. It does for the aesthetic though. So should you make this? Depends. I mean, if you're going to a party or you really want the aesthetic, or you want to share the picture on Instagram, this is definitely a win. If you just want a fudgy brownie with the tanginess of cream cheese, the black bottom brownie is, I mean, this, but easier. So I would say go with the black bottom brownie. So I really hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.